To this meeting of the Housing Subcommittee on Thursday the 19th of November. May I remind you that this meeting will be recorded and subsequently made available for public listening. Okay, we'll move on please. Item 1, Sederunt and apologies. Claire?
Thank you, Chairman. I've got one apology this morning from Councillor Mail. I believe Councillor Gilroy will be substituting.
Thank you. I believe there may be some other members that will be attending shortly. Move on to item 2, declarations of interest. And can I first come in and say that I declare an interest in item 5 due to the fact that I am a private registered landlord, but I have taken governance advice, and that is that because there's no financial gain in the report before us, then I have no need to leave the meeting. Patsy? Okay, and Jim?
I'm the same as well.
Jeff?
Just a moment, I'm probably the same as well.
It's a good job that we don't have to leave the meeting then, isn't it? No further declarations of interest? No, thank you. Moving on to item 3, we have a presentation by Joe Ferguson, the Energy Agency for the Greener Homes Fund, and I'll ask John to introduce that.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. We've brought along Joe Ferguson this morning to give members a presentation on the Greener Homes Fund. Members may recall that back in 2012, you agreed as part of the SHIP process to establish a rolling fund of £500,000 to supplement the core SHIP programme to provide further additional funds for green initiatives. So Joe's here just to provide an update on the work that he's done with the RSLs over that period. So over to Joe, thanks.
Hello, can you hear me now? Yes. Thanks very much for having me here. I'm going to talk for hopefully no more than 15 minutes about the activities of the Greener Homes Fund and the initiative behind it. And I will be happy to take questions about it at the end. Give you a summary of what I'm going to cover, a bit of background. I'm going to explain how the system with the Energy Agency and the local housing associations operates. I will tell you about the projects which have been undertaken and those, or should I say, the advice projects, those which have developments which have come to completion and those which have been approved. And I will explain a bit about the actual practical outcomes of the work that's been done as a result of the investment, and talk a little bit about what we might do in future. So a bit of the background. I hope that many of you are aware of the Affordable Housing Supply Programme. It's one of many national programmes, of course, so may not know the details, but part of that national scheme was an offer of central funding for intended to improve the standard, the energy efficiency standards of new buildings. And there was an offer of £4,000 per housing unit for buildings which achieved not just the current building regs, but the silver standard. There was a bronze, silver, and gold standard described, which were better than the standard building regs under the building regs 2010, and those that achieved it could claim an extra £4,000 for each. Section 7 is the part of the building regs which covers carbon emissions. So it's quite sort of academic in a way. It's not particularly related to how, to the comfort of dwellings. And that was really how we got into discussion. The Energy Agency, I don't know if many of you are aware of the agency, but it's been going since 1996 and has worked quite closely with Dumfries and Galloway Council as well as the Ayrshire, the 3 Ayrshire authorities since then. So we've done a number of projects in the area, so we were already working together. The discussion went along the lines of, could Dumfries and Galloway Council do something which was at least as good or better than that silver standard, that AHSP scheme, but actually impacting more on the real life costs and comfort for people using these buildings. And I believe that we could. So we instigated this scheme in 2012, and it's been running, it's still going now, so I'm going to tell you a bit about what we've been doing. The modus operandum, it begins when a housing association has the plans, has a site identified for a development. There's a meeting between me and the development officer and the appointed architect to talk about the layout on the ground, the number of units that they plan to put there, and just to see whether there's anything relating to the energy consumption aspects of design which could be brought in at that point. It's a bit of an iterative process. A design is produced by the architect. I produce a report. Because many of these developments have more similarities than differences, I have developed a sort of a basic guide which covers most of the aspects of building design as affects energy efficiency, and then for each development a site-specific report. Each of them run to 20 pages, that sort of thing, which covers detail of how the basic unit, as required by the building regulations, how it could be improved. And often it'll result in anything up to a dozen recommendations and listed in order of the cost and impact, sort of a priority list, those which are cheapest and give the best returns, and that's usually increasing the insulation specification and running up to the other end, things like solar PV systems and things called sun spaces, which may cost several £1,000s on their own, but it's a comprehensive view on how what could be done with these designs to make them better. Then the housing association, with the help of the contractor, will cost these recommendations, and that will show up which ones could be actually achieved within the £4,000 to £5,000 per unit. We come to an agreement as to what is best done, which is then put to the council, and once that is approved, they go ahead and build the development with these elements, these enhancements built in, and the association comes to the council to claim the costs. That's right. Here's a list of the 11 projects which, since we started in January 2013, have gone as far as design. The reason one is crossed out is because it's the one of the 11 which was dropped. It hasn't been proceeded with. Those which don't say DGHB after them are Lawburn Housing Association. Lawburn has been, I have to say, has been more enthusiastic in embracing this service. So they do figure rather more highly. Bottom corner there, I've shown the number of units that have actually that those that is the sum of those without Eastfield Road. So if they all went ahead, 141. If they all went ahead and claimed the £45,000, you're talking of a total of, if they all go ahead, 570,000 to 600,000. But of course, they probably won't all proceed. Of those that have actually been finished off, Halliday Place is a development in Main Street, Dalbeattie. It was opened in November last year. The total costs for those 10 units of the additional enhancements, which was approved by ourselves, was £50,000, an average of 5,000 per unit. The enhancements were insulation, sun tubes, which brought light into areas in the centre of the house which would otherwise need permanent lighting, and heat recovery ventilation systems. the picture of the opening event. In the middle, carrying the child, is the first resident of the house just behind. I'll mention her comments later. Another of the 4 completed developments was the sheltered or supported housing development in Beeswing, with one of the first residents there at the opening. In that case, it was a pretty well-funded project in any case, but not quite well enough to provide the ground source heat pump, which heats the 5 units and the office. And £25,000 was provided for that, and it opened last August. Oh, nice. No, yes, that's right, August this year. Other completed projects: Golf Avenue in Dumfries, 4 units, £17,000 was provided for added insulation, triple glazing, and flue gas heat recovery. That's on the gas boilers. They have heat recovery systems which preheat water. Galloway House is sheltered housing in Thornhill. They got added glazing insulation sometimes as well, £41,000, so just under the £4,000 per unit in that case. Just to give you an idea of the actual standards achieved, this is taken from the energy performance certificate for one of the Golf Avenue houses, and you can see that it's there's and the only reason that 5 stars weren't achieved for the gas is that it is gas rather than renewable. Air tightness 6 down at the bottom is very good, by any standards, but it's not quite as they would be able to achieve. Approved projects at the moment: 22 units in Kirkcudbright, to have that list of improvements. Again, the cost there is rather less than the 4,000, which helps the budget a bit. They're due to go on site in July next year. And then a small development in Dumfries, backing onto Brook Street and Queen Street on the other side, 40,000 for 8 units. Now you see that the list of enhancements that are actually used are fairly similar, and you might say that they're not very exciting. But and of course, it would be fantastic if they could have a bit more and could go further down that priority list of mine. But what they get for that money is quite a substantial improvement. The heating costs for one Halliday place are, according to the energy performance certificate, a total of £347 a year. Now, those EPCs tend to overstate what people actually spend. The suggestion there is about 95 pence per day average over the year. So it really is very good. It's equivalent to less than 7 units of electricity supplying all the house's needs over the year. The lady who lived there, she came to the opening and expressed, although we don't have anything in writing, any sort of empirical evidence, the housing associations have yet to undertake that. Anecdotally, the residents all, they say, remark on how amazingly cheap they are to run and how warm they are. That lady in Dalbeattie said that she was spending £4 a week on gas, and she could barely believe it. That's with a family. Showing, yes, that's the energy performance certificate, showing 82 points. The average Scottish home averages out at 60 points, and 82 in the B grade really is very good. Not as good as we'd like, of course, but it's a good start. There's Halliday Place. It's a slightly different arrangement there. The roof, the insulation wasn't quite to the same standard, but the air tightness, you see, which was 6 cubic meters per hour per square meter down at Gulf Road, here is 2, and which is a really exceptional. That's at the level where you are obliged to have mechanical ventilation to avoid people not having enough air, and it's it's sufficient for a passive house standard. So what do the tenants say? Yes, I mean, I would have liked this slide to have been busier, but speaking to the housing associations, they haven't actually done any studies yet, and you know, whether they should be relied on to provide that evidence is up to you as the funder of this project, I guess. But they say that they intend to do some work on seeing what the costs are and getting qualitative responses from the residents about how they see these houses. As for the future, I told you what had been completed and what had been approved. I haven't had anything from DGHB. I haven't been in touch with them much at all, in fact, recently. But Lawburn are planning another 35 units in two separate, similarly sized developments in St. Rara and Castle Douglas. But they, I know, are taking a close interest in the concept of the passive house. And I would like to, I know John would like to sow in your minds the idea of aiming at supporting a passive house development as another example. We have one in the area, of course, down at Dormant. Mr. Carruthers' development down at Dormant is an example of a passive house development, and you know, it would be good for the housing associations to do the same thing. What that means, I say passive house or passive house because written in the German, that relates specifically to a written down standard, which relates to this figure of 15 kilowatt hours for heating per square meter of floor area per year. That is the formal standard, but just generally speaking, my idea of a passive house is one which doesn't need a central heating system, and that is the case under the formal standard. But if you could simply make your houses in such a way that that there's no need for a central heating system, they can make do with a stove or a single a room heater to provide all the heat they need, and that is clearly going to be very beneficial. Yes, what that relates to is an 80 square meter dwelling using just 1,200 kilowatt hours per year for heating it, which would be £48 a year, and we know that is possible. It's just a matter of specifying correctly, and it won't be long before, in my view, before all new buildings are required to be like that anyway. But my dream is that we have an example here which would inspire, the houses which are being built alongside can be compared and to show what can be done. That's the end of my slides. I'm happy to take questions now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Members, do you have any questions? Jeff?
Just in terms of your investment, I'm just doing a rough graph here. I mean, it must be a sigmoidal sort of return on investment. At what point do you say, well, I'm not going to make the last 40 pence per week saving unless I'm going to put in an awful lot more additional money in terms of investment into the insulation or whatever? Do you have any information on that?
So the question is the incremental returns, the marginal returns being gradually less.
Yeah.
It would be good to know what the actual benefit from that last pound spent would be. I agree, it would be, and that sort of thing is difficult enough to do in a sort of laboratory environment. Organisations like the BRE, the British Research Establishment, has houses with no one living in them, with full of controls and sensors, trying to work out the effect of different specifications. In the point, I'm glad you mentioned that in a way, because although I won't be able to answer your question, it's what we're trying to achieve is buildings which don't necessarily tick all the boxes for whether it's a silver or gold or passive standard or whatever, but which are genuinely in real life comfortable to live in and cheap to heat, because we could have two silver standard or gold standard houses which are different shapes and different designs, different layouts, one of which could be much more expensive to live in real life to keep it at comfortable temperature than the other, possibly because of overheating, possibly because of ventilation, all these different things. And to achieve what you suggest, which is a perfectly good idea, would be very, very hard to do. So yeah, you have to sort of take a view really on whether the end result is of a home which is cheap for people to live in is worth it. But you're quite right that every additional £1,000 will potentially achieve less than the last one. But having said that, it's not always the case. I mean, I mentioned that the top of the scale of my priority list is a sun space, which is effectively a sort of passive solar panel, an area on the south-facing end of a building which collects solar energy passively, which can be by means of very simple controls fed into the house to when necessary, when it's needed, or kept out of it when it isn't. I mean, that may cost several £1,000s. You know, they could be spending all of the money from this fund on that alone. But in the right situation, that could be saving a lot of heating energy for several months either side of December, January. But again, to actually empirically prove that is not easy to do. It's only, I mean, our forebears, you know, up until the Industrial Revolution, they learnt just by trial and error what made a house that was comfortable and easy to live in. And in fact, we've lost a lot of that common sense. I'm sorry, it's not a very good answer, but best I can do.
Jim?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I hear you saying that you want to support RSLs to passive house standard. What about smaller locally based organisations who might wish in future to build community-owned housing for rental to their own community? And related to that, where could a member of the public find the bronze, silver, gold passive house standards in easily understandable English? Because not everybody's technically minded. You would need to find it in plain English for communities to understand.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Yeah, John will take that.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. In terms of the first part of the question from Councillor McClung about community-based initiatives, we're certainly happy to support those initiatives, and there's been one successful such development in Closeburn. I'm aware that there are proposals both in the east and the west of the region where we're looking at working with community-based trusts, and we're in active discussions with them. So in answer to that question, it's certainly something that we would look to support and try and provide the opportunities to access other funding sources to make that happen. In terms of the technical question about the standards, I'll maybe ask Joe to answer that.
Thank you. I think that was where do people find the detail that required to tell them how to achieve these higher standards. It doesn't take too long on the Scottish government website with the right searching abilities to find references to the bronze, gold, and silver standards. But you're right. No, how would people even know that they exist? They aren't very well publicised. You could say that the house builders and architects, you might say it's part of their remit to be aware of these. And I think that the passive house movement is gaining publicity and column inches, and it's more and more people that I come across are aware of it. But it is up to people to seek it out with the help of their advisors.
I think maybe it might be something to consider going forward as well, but to get that information out for as you say, the bronze, silver and gold standard, it might be worth considering at some time approaching building standards, so that when the application comes in for the building regulations, maybe a leaflet could be sent out with a pack for that, just to inform members of what's available and possibly how to get in contact and take that forward. I mean, it's up to members to decide that, obviously, but it might be a suggestion.
May I
Yeah.
mention something else? In South Ayrshire, the Energy Agency runs a CPD series, a Continuing Professional Development Series, which is open. The list for the address list includes all people in planning and architects and builders, housing associations, etc. And I don't know whether the invitation list extends down as far as here, but it's a monthly thing in Ayr, so it's a bit of a trek for you lot. But it's something which could be replicated down here. And my point is that we have had people from building standards fairly regularly coming along to that series and giving an regularly invited audience updates on that sort of matter.
Ian?
Chairman, I think you come up with quite a good idea there, actually, Chairman, in regards to the extra paperwork. My question was similar to Jim's, or maybe frame it in a different way. I've tried to get an understanding when it comes to, there's probably three main benefits for this. You get your carbon reductions, you get your energy efficiencies, being one thing. You've got your home comforts, so the individual families living in their homes, it's more comfortable for them. But in regards to the actual benefit financially to each individual home, I was trying to get an understanding, seeing what your figures you come up with, what would an average family saving in a year, just in standard layman's terms, what would they actually saving in a year, money-wise? So we're putting in an extra, is it 4K, I think it is, per household, and that'll take it from a standard building standards regs up to the higher level. And what would a family, we've got different levels, looking at it holistically, you've got different ways in which people and the wider communities benefit, but just for that family living in there, how much do they benefit financially on an annual basis on average? And is there any mechanisms for the private sector in regards to tapping into something like this?
It will be very helpful when Lawburn have completed their survey. The difficulty is that, unlike the Building Research Establishment, we haven't got an unimproved house and an improved house with exactly the same family living in the same way to provide that. The only thing we can base that is available to base an estimate on is the SAP, the Standard Assessment Procedure calculations, which have to be done in order to obtain building warrant. And the difference, because the current building standards are in fact so much higher than they were 10, 15 years ago, a house built to the current standards is already far cheaper than a 1960s or 1920s house to live in anyway. So the improvements that we're talking about now seem small in absolute terms. And in fact, the SAP calculations for a typical house in Halliday Place in Dalbeattie showed an improvement of only several pounds, £4 or £5 a year. But that didn't allow for various things. It assumed, if I remember, that the heat recovery ventilation system, which is installed as an energy efficiency device, it assumes that it runs throughout the year, even when there is no, when the heating is not operating, rather than using the windows for ventilation in the summer in the normal way. It doesn't account for for example, the use of the sun tubes which bring light into central areas of the house, which would otherwise result in people having lighting running all the time. There's no allowance for that. One or two other things which the blind computer program can't see, can't make an allowance for. When we're designing the houses, we talk about, I give a list of priorities which can be costed and put up for funding, but that doesn't account for the general design advice resulting in elements like the windows being kept to sensible sizes, the inclusion of draft lobbies, which is now absolutely standard in degree, but it wasn't necessarily at the start of this. But now I've sat down with a lot of the architects, and there are design elements which will, allow savings, which don't appear in the SAP calculation. So I'm afraid that you had a second part of the question, which was about.
It was. The first part. I thought maybe other than SAP, maybe the EPCs, you might be able to validate again, derive it from that at some point. Maybe information getting a future report at some point. But I thought a standard would come up with.
Just one figure which.
But private sector, Chairman, was the second part.
what mechanisms is there for the private sector towards funds like this?
Sorry to interrupt you there. There is a figure from that sample calculation for with and without enhancements that House and Holiday Place without the enhancements would take 3,160 kilowatt hours a year to heat it. With the enhancements, it was 2,400. So it's a reduction of 23% in the theoretical heat demand of the building, which is not insignificant. For the housing, the private, sorry, Mr. Chairman, the question was about the private sector, and is this... Well, I beg your pardon, I don't think I remember what the question was, in fact.
Clearly there's a mechanism here for, I think it's RSLs in particular. Is there anything there for the private sector that's similar to this type of...
That's a question
fund?
for
Yeah,
John.
I think we'll let John take that one.
Thanks, thanks, Chair. In terms of existing homes and existing owner-occupiers, obviously we've got the Heaps Abs programme, which has been funded for a number of years, and again that's delivered through a different arm of the Energy Agency. If you're talking about new build developments, I'm not aware of any additional public subsidy that would assist private developers to introduce some of the efficiencies that we have into private commercial market housing. It might be out there, but I'm not aware of any funds.
Yeah,
Just a quick in regards to, like I said, when we tied up with the National Housing Trust, took that programme forward, did we put anything in there to look for higher standards or not? Just as a query.
No, the National Housing Trust initiative was developed by Robertson Homes. They weren't part of this scheme, and so that they would have built those properties to the building standards regulations that were pertaining to the time. But there was no, they weren't part of this programme.
Okay. Jim, okay.
Thanks, Chair. It's an observation, maybe rather than a question. I toured Galloway at Thornhill at the invitation of Lordburn Housing, and I have to say it's a very well sought development. I like the initiatives that have been introduced there. I found it a bit unusual the way the toilet was lit with a sun channel, because there isn't an external window. So I'd be interested to see when the survey comes back how tenants deal with the changes and the innovation that's there, and I would hope that maybe be brought back to this committee at some time. And it's not a criticism, I just saw it as different than what I would regard as a standard mechanism when a toilet doesn't have an outside window. But the sun channel that was there that day was absolutely fine, and it is obviously an initiative, and I'd just like to see how tenants react over time to, once they become familiar with the property, and how that reflects in the survey that will be carried out.
All right, Jim, thanks. Yeah, the sun tunnel aspect has been on the go for quite a few years, and it's been utilised wherever necessary by builders. So it's not a new thing. It has been out for quite a while to get light into a room where you can't have an external window. But
First time I saw the light, then I've never seen it before. Never known Sanker, no.
okay, thank you, members. Thank you, Joe, for that presentation, and I'm sure that if members require further more in-depth information, if they just contact Joe at the Energy Agency, he'll be happy to forward that to them. Thank you. Moving on, item 4, Strategic Housing Investment Plan 2016-17 to 2021. Purpose of this report is to provide an update on the Council's Strategic Housing Investment Plan and identifies future priority projects. The report also proposes the establishment of a new fund to support the additional costs of a barrier-free lifetime homes. John, have you anything to add?
Thanks, Chair. No, nothing to add to the report. Happy to take any questions.
Members? Jim?
It's again just an observation, and I spoke to Jim just yesterday about it, so I'm sure it will be dealt with. It just the Sanker Old Primary School that featured on the list here also includes the Job Centre. That was the former Job Centre. That was the initial proposal, and the Job Centre is not part of the purchase, and it's not part of the proposed development. And I would hate this to be in the public domain, and the owner of the Job Centre suddenly think he's won a watch, or that we have somehow stolen his land. But I did bring it to Jim's attention only yesterday, and I'm sure it'll be dealt with. I just want to be absolutely sure that in future reports it's not there, because it's just something that was historic.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Yeah, we'll make sure that gets amended before we send up to the Scottish Government. Thank you.
Alistair, yeah.
Thanks very much indeed, Chair. A couple of observations as well. It's gratifying to see, some of us might say at long last, that there's moves afoot, in fact, to develop in what's known as the waterfront part of Stranraer. I can remember being actively involved a significant number of years ago on the part of the old Wicken District Council in acquiring various derelict type buildings in that part of Stranraer which were knocked flat, and it was with the express purpose of providing amenity and shelter type accommodation in what will essentially be the town centre. It's been a long time coming, as I've said, sir, but it's good to know, in fact, that moves are now afoot, in fact, to deliver it. We're talking about the waterfront, though. Are we talking about the northern side of the road, or are we talking about the site in the vicinity of the council's library and basically one-stop shop in the centre of Stranraer? That would be helpful to get clarification on, Chair. And the other point is, in fact, and I'm sure, given your previous involvement or your comparatively recent involvement, you'll be interested in what I'm about to say. I discovered recently from the Monreath District Action Group that the planning consents for the 3 self-build plots in the village of Monreath have been allowed to lapse. That is a disappointment, bearing in mind what we've had to go through with these. But a question in relation to the first points would be appreciated.
Thanks, Alistair. Just on your second point there, I'm actually meeting with the new CEO of the Dumfries and Galloway Small Housing Trust after this meeting. That was information I didn't know, so I'll bring that up with him then.
Grateful to you, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. In terms of the proposal for the Stranraer waterfront, it is actually part of the waterfront development. We've been in discussions with McKinney's, who are the council's preferred partner, and they're working up proposals to include specific social rent amenity housing as part of their scheme. It's at early stages, and we'll need to see what they bring forward once they've talked to other potential interested parties, but it would form part of that waterfront proposal, not in the town centre as suggested. It's the waterfront that we're talking about.
Grateful, Chair, for the response. I'll leave it to those members who are now, I stress now, perhaps more directly involved to develop the issue if they wish.
Thank you. Finlay?
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of questions with regards to the Lifetime Homes Fund. I see it's coming, or propose it comes from the council tax second home. I've brought this up before, and the last time it was with regards to the public realm improvements in Queen Street. Is there, and I looked for it, I couldn't find it, this committee has got the power to decide what the second home's council tax is spent on, and that falls within the remit of that fund. Yep.
John?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, the use of the council tax second homes money is allowed through a statutory instrument from the Scottish Government, and it specifically is ring-fenced to support affordable housing projects and projects that feature in the local housing strategy. This subcommittee has got full delegation to decide on those matters. So yes, the delegation sits with this subcommittee. It doesn't go anywhere else. The money can't be used for anything else other than what is identified as a housing priority.
Okay,
Thanks for that. The other thing was we currently support adaptations to properties, as we can see in another item that's coming up at the end of the meeting. Where did that money come from previously? And so when we retrofit properties for disabled access and whatever, where does that money come from? And are we setting up this fund where there's actually maybe another funding route we can get that from? Does that make sense?
John?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think Councillor Carson's referring to the care and repair budget. The care and repair budget deals with private owner-occupied and private tenancies. The funding source of that was originally a private sector housing grant, which came from the Scottish Government. That was unring-fenced in 2009, but we still get part of our block allocation is a notional sum to support care and repair, and that's continued to be used for those purposes. And this subcommittee agrees that each March, through the scheme of assistance review, that is distinct from what's been proposed here. In terms of what we're proposing here, it's specifically to support the social rented sector in delivering lifetime barrier-free homes. The current funding arrangement for that would be through a combination of RSL's own funding and Scottish Government grant, what they call Stage 3 funding. It's cumbersome, it's often reactive, and what we're saying is if the council sets up a fund and we make it clear in the report linked to the health and social care integration arrangements, we can be much more proactive, we can plan at the design stage, and then we can identify appropriate clients for those properties rather than the other way around. So we're not double counting the different funds for different purposes.
And just before I move on to other members, just a point on the council tax second homes. There is a table in the appendices that you were supplied, and there is a larger copy of that rather than the one in the report, which is a bit difficult to read. But just on that actual table, John, could you actually clarify the figures there for us? Because when you look at the tax raised compared to the tax dues, they don't obviously amount up to the tax that we have carried forward. So if you could just explain that for members.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. The table is just a snapshot of the amount of tax raised over previous 2 financial years and the current balance. Obviously, what it doesn't reflect is the cumulative amount that's been rolled forward from previous years. And as the report says, the current position is we have just over £2 million unallocated funds within the council tax second homes pot. So that's the basis of the decision making. There is 2 million currently unallocated in that fund. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Jim McClung.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Like my colleague, I would welcome anything, new housing, etc., especially the very sheltered part of it on the waterfront. I'm not really too precious about where on the waterfront we need those type of houses in Stranraer. On the council tax and second homes, on the table 4.2, so page 13, or I think it's the second last page of the big one, it says Dunmuir Park, 420 additional development costs in 12-13. Can possibly offline, can I get information as to when and at what committee we actually made that decision? And just the last one's an observation. It's on the current house and supply division one. It's the first page on the appendix. Former Bruce Hotel, Glenluce. I've never known it to be called the Bruce Hotel. None of the locals know it as the Bruce Hotel. In the years that I've stayed there, it's had 3 different names. It's the Glenby, the Glenluce, and the Kings. So I don't know where the Bruce Hotel is in Glenluce.
Maybe you just don't visit that often enough, Jim. I'll let John answer them for you.
Thanks, Chair. In terms of the first question, the funding for Dumfries Park was agreed at Housing Subcommittee in May 2011. So that was the part of the investment and innovation package in 2011. And in terms of the Bruce Hotel, we'll clarify with DGHP, see what they're calling that project, but that's what they've told us it is. But I think we're talking about the same scheme.
Thank you. Members, Ian?
Thanks, Chairman. Just briefly to say that I think the strategic housing investment plan certainly looks fit for purpose, and I'm happy to see that and see that as being approved as a way forward. In regards to our second recommendation and the Lifetime Homes Fund, I just wanted to make sure that the right divide would be, I think through the Act, it'll be revoked from this type of housing that's built, and the right divide won't apply. Because clearly if we're putting money into this housing, we didn't want to see that lost.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. The right to buy is being removed as an outcome of the Housing Scotland Act 2014, I think. So as of August of next year, right to buy will not apply for any properties. In addition to that, the council also agreed pressured area status, covering virtually the whole of the stock anyway. So right to buy has been quite restricted over the last number of years, and it will be abolished through the legislation.
Patsy?
Yes, it's just a question. You mentioned quite often, health and social care integration and all the rest of it. When with these funds, which are coming from council tax, second homes, but in the future, do you anticipate getting a contribution from the Health Board, National Health Service? Because it will make a difference. And you're bringing in this health and social care integration, which is all meant to be joined up and together and whatever. And do you anticipate that happening?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. That could well be an outcome of the integration process. Obviously, it's early days yet. We've got the locality planning arrangements in place and the strategic planning arrangements in place. You're quite right to talk about the concept of pool and budget and making better use and prioritising. By making sure that housing is at the table for those discussions and making the case for investment in the housing stock, we would hope that decisions would be made to support the kind of initiatives we're talking about at the minute. But obviously, the integrated joint board hasn't got any budget setting powers just yet, but post-April, I think that's a discussion that needs to be had.
So, follow-up, I don't imagine that the Health Board or NHS give anything towards aids and adaptations to houses at the moment, do they? I mean, it'll all be done through us. I mean, so I just think it might be slightly foreign to them to think they're responsible for this. So it might have a bit of persuasion to do, which I hope the board members will take it upon themselves to do, because I think it's the right thing to pursue.
The Health Board have got some occupational therapy services that would provide some limited equipment and adaptations, but they certainly don't get into the kind of capital spend that we're talking about here at the minute. But it's something that potentially we could look at working with them on once the integrated arrangements are embedded.
Thanks. And I think we'll hear later on in the exempt report as well the effect that some of these adaptations and that can really have on people. And I think this new proposed fund will go a long way to helping that situation as well, and therefore not have to sort of retrofit. But Colin?
It was on that very subject, Chair. I mean, it does sound like a really positive development. I'm keen to know sort of how many units you think the figure of $500,000 is likely to cover, and how we got to that level, given there is obviously funding within the council tax second homes income, how we got to the $500,000 figure, how many units we anticipate being able to cover from that level of funding, the types of adaptations you're actually looking to cover, because obviously, the needs of individuals vary from individual to individual, and it's what sort of adaptations are likely to be covered in that.
Thanks, Chair. We've worked on the assumption that it might be about 20 to 30k per unit. So the reason that we've set the figure of $500,000 is that we look for that to be a kind of rolling fund. So if in any one year we develop through the SHIP maybe 10 units for maybe 30,000 each, that'll be a call of 300,000. We top the fund up by 300,000 for the next year to make sure that we've got that $500,000 figure year on year going forward. So that's the way that we think it'll work, and it'll be more cost effective doing that way, because you design in a lot of the work from the outset rather than having to go back and seek different planning consents, maybe change layouts and all the additional costs required in that. It's about trying to design it and build in all the adaptations from the outset. So that's the kind of figure we would look at, and we think that the £500,000 is sufficient to make sure that we can meet that need.
Jim Dempster.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just much in the same lines as Colin, probably just a different way asking the same question. As far as housing is concerned with the IJB, the Integrated Board, it's very much part of the process that will be used in health and well-being and how we develop that. So it will definitely feature, if you like, in the consultation and the work the IJB does. The question was, will we have a cap or ceiling on the spend per unit, given that Colin's already explained or suggested there'll be varying requirements depending upon the individual client or service user or tenant. Will there be a cap on how much we will commit per unit to construction costs to support this?
Yeah, it's a good point, Jim.
Thanks, Chair. We haven't got a defined cap as such, but obviously we'd need to operate within the Council's financial standard orders, and if it was an exceptional case where the costs were extensive, then I think the advice would be we'd need to come back for a member decision. If it was a very exceptional case where the costs well exceeded what we thought was the kind of 20 to 30k, it might be then that we come back and make a member decision. We just need to see how the scheme develops, I think.
And I think if members agree later on taking this forward, you'll get a lot more for your money putting these changes into a new build than you would doing a retrofit. You know, you get better value for money doing it from a new build standard. Alistair?
If I can come back,
okay.
Chair.
Yeah, just come back.
You're right, Alistair. I'll come back just for a minute. Just that the exempt report discusses commitment to finance, and there is a discussion among social work committee members about how that money is best used. And I hope this wouldn't be another circuitous route to get to the same circumstances we find ourselves in with these exempt reports.
Alistair?
Thanks, Chair. That's essentially the point that I was going to raise. I think there's further mileage on this issue when we come to consider the exempt item of business on today's agenda, because I would certainly wish to be able to, comment in relation to how that will fit in with what's being proposed at paragraph 3.7 here in the future. So I'll leave it until then with your leave, sir. Thank you.
Finlay?
Thanks for letting me back in, Chairman. It's just something that was raised last night. We had our community meeting for the health and social care integration, and there was one gentleman suggest that there was a lack of sheltered accommodation for people who wanted to buy, and there was no private housing which had some of the amenity housing available. Is there any plans? Is there anything we can do as a committee to ensure that? So for a build, for example, in Kirkcudbright, where we've got 23 amenity buildings, that some of these might be available for sale or for purchase, the dual equity or whatever they call it, projects. We get some other sheltered housing. Can we do anything to ensure that some of these sheltered housing developments actually have some units available for sale for the private sector?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Certainly new supply shared equity in terms of the general stock is something that we've worked with RSLs on for a number of years. We've never provided new supply shared equity for sheltered, and I think there might be funding rules that prevent that happening. But I would need to check and get back to you. I don't know if Jim, you aware? No.
Yeah, Jim. Yeah, Jim.
There's actually clarification going back a bit in the discussion, Chair, if you don't mind, about the £500,000 fund. Because I think the way members are considering it isn't that it would involve doing adaptations to properties to meet individual needs. What it's actually going to do is future-proof the stock from the outset. So, for example, it would be building in components like wet rooms, for example, building in the capacity to take hoists, rather than providing specific adaptations for specific people. So it's introducing more the kind of concept of lifetime houses as a norm through our development programme that we don't currently deliver. And I think it's important that we don't confuse that with actually adapting a property, which is what that fund's not setting out to do. It's more about lifetime homes than adapted properties. So in theory, if there wasn't somebody with a disability that was allocated one of those properties, they would be able to live in it too. So it's about meeting people's needs throughout their lifespan rather than saying, you've got needs now, we'll respond to that. So it's about future-proofing the stock. And probably, I think it's quite an innovative approach in terms of the health and social care integration agenda. And I think we're probably one of the first councils in Scotland to do that as part of our development programme as standard.
Thanks, Jim. Colin?
I suppose that was why I asked about the types of adaptations, because that was certainly my interpretation. So how would the allocations policy result in, you know, would these homes simply be allocated in exactly the same way as any other property? Therefore, you wouldn't effectively necessarily be tailoring for somebody with a particular need at that stage. Will they just simply be allocated in the same way that all the housing stock will be allocated?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, obviously, we're doing a lot of work at the moment with the NHS and social work services. In the first instance, we'd probably go to colleagues in both of those services, depending on the location, and say, do you have an identified particular need in that location that can be met by one of those houses? So, for example, one of the developments in the Ship is a development in Moffat, and that's next to the community hospital. So we're actually looking to link the housing development physically with the hospital by means of a path, and probably have some step up, step down accommodation as part of that development. So in the first instance, it may be offered to social work and NHS as part of meeting their responsibilities for housing with people with particular needs. But if they can't occupy the properties through their client base, then absolutely they would just go to the waiting list. So these properties, you would be able to live in them if you'd no needs whatsoever. You'd be able to live in them if you were an older person and you had, say, emerging mobility problems. But similarly, they would be able to accommodate you if you had absolutely no mobility and required hoisting, etc. So the idea is they meet the whole range of needs, but part of it is working jointly with social work and NHS to deliver the integration agenda. But they wouldn't all go there. It would be a mixture, depending on the location.
Okay, thank you, members. I have no further questions. So, oh, sorry, Ian.
Sorry, Chair, I thought you'd caught my eye earlier. I missed that. Just, it was in regards to, it was the points I picked up. Jim came in just at the right time. That's the point. My understanding was that this was for new builds, and that's why I asked about the right to buy question. But I thought we through the design standards, what would be added, wet rooms, hoists, potential stairlifts, whatever's in place. That type of stuff, I thought we'd have been able to kind of stabilise the cost round about that when it's coming from a new build. So it was kind of hearing it could go above 20 to 30k. I thought appropriate. Above 30, I thought, well, we should have been able to really cap that and had an idea. But the only point I would like to pick up is what Jim said there in regards to the allowing these type of houses to go just to all and sundry. I mean, I would have thought these should have been round about again somebody with a specific need. And just to put that in the context, I know somebody local to my own ward just had to ease an adaptation, but are we beyond the cost of what we're talking about here? We've got a report later on where we can look at a similar type of case, and this is about trying to resolve that, isn't it? And I think if we did a house like this local to the person, that's the decision would have been chosen, just to move that person to that house, being a much easier solution at that time. So just the 20 to 30k, if that answer, I think that should be able to be designed in right at the start. And that's, I think it should be, and the allocations, maybe Colin was touching on that, but the allocation policy should show that in the first instance, these should be restricted to people with the assessed need.
Yeah, do you want to come back, Jim? Yeah.
Yep, thanks, Chair. Lord Burn Housing Association and DGHP have actually, in response to this initiative, developed specifications for those types of houses. So I think if it would help members, it would in fact be possible to attach some cost to those specifications once they've been finally agreed. But there's been work done around that so that we're delivering a standard specification as best we can across the sector. And as well, it wouldn't be all of the stock that's developed in this way. It'd be a proportion of each development. So, for example, I think the target within the report we're saying 40%. But it would be a proportion of each development would be developed to this standard. So say there were 10 houses, 3 might go for medical points and be allocated via social work, but the other 7 would just be allocated through the waiting list. But it's just basically so that we start just now, because we got a lot of emphasis placed in the ageing population and the so-called demographic time bomb and all this kind of stuff. So what we're trying to do is say, well, that being the case, what we need to do is build houses that address that issue so that we're not left at a later date doing very expensive adaptations into houses that don't meet those needs in the first place. So it's the first step towards doing that.
Okay, thank you, members. We can move to the recommendations. 2.1, members are asked to agree the updated strategic housing investment plan as set out in the appendix. And 2.2, to establish a lifetime homes fund of £500,000 from the council tax second homes fund, which will be used to cover the additional costs of providing particular needs adaptations as detailed in 3.7. And I wonder, possibly just on that particular issue, if we put, if members would like to put another recommendation in to say that we would receive a yearly report on how that fund would be determined, i.e., and include the specification that are put forward by the housing associations, so that we can relate to the type of specifications going into and how the fund is being allocated. Okay. Thank you. Moving on to item 5, private rented housing panel. Alan Glendinning is going to speak on this one, and I'll pass over to Alan. Have you anything further to add at this point?
Thanks, Chair. It's just a brief update. New legislation introduced through the Housing Scotland Act 2014. This brings third-party reporting rights to the local authority in terms of repairs and maintenance issues with the private rented sector. Previously, tenants would only be allowed to make application to the PRHP for any repairs and maintenance issues that hadn't been addressed by landlords. We would propose certainly that that would still be the primary route, that tenants would still be encouraged to make application where there were failures. But this obviously gives the local authority an opportunity to go beyond that, where, for whatever reason, a tenant doesn't feel able or is unwilling to make that application. There comes with that some difficulties in assessing when it's proportional and necessary to make these applications, taking into account particularly some tenants' views. But the aim in everything that we do with regard to this is to try and encourage landlords to comply with the legal requirements placed on them, and enforcement would be as a last resort, if you like. We're working through at the moment just the application process and the processes that will be used to make these applications. And realistically, I think the report is fairly self-explanatory. Obviously, if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to take them.
Thank you, Alan. Members? Alistair?
Thanks very much indeed, Chair. Paragraph 3.2.4, it points out that the proposals as implemented through section 22(1)A of the 2006 Act are to be specifically included in the Council's scheme of delegation to officers and delegated to the manager, HMO licensing and landlord registration. Now, in the face of it, Chair, I have no problems whatsoever with that provision, but, you know, there are certain circumstances at the moment, and officers in turn delegate to the licensing panel certain aspects of this type of work. Is it envisaged that there will be any interface or indeed any sort of any difficulty, as it were, in discharging that? I'd be grateful for the response, Chair.
Yes, thank you, Alistair. Alan?
Yep, thanks, Chair. The issue, I think, is in relation to the application. Clearly, any failure to comply with a repairing standard enforcement order becomes then an issue as to the fit and proper status of the landlord themselves, and I think that would be the appropriate point in time to involve the licensing panel. So it would be any failure to comply. There's already an established legal process for the issue of a repairing standard enforcement order where a landlord hasn't complied with the repairing standard. Where a landlord fails to comply with the repairing standard enforcement order, then there is notice given to the local authority by the PRHP, and that, I think, is the point in time where we would look to consider enforcement for a failure to maintain a property to the appropriate standards, the landlord having given ample opportunity to comply with those requirements.
Thanks, Chair.
Ian?
Thanks, Chair. It was similar to Alistair's, maybe just in a wider context. I mean, I think this is morally it's the right thing. We're noting it. It's here. It's been agreed. It's in legislation. But it was pressures. Was there any unforeseen pressures we might see on the council or even the private sector, the landlord side? Is it, if we looked at impact assessment, it's not there because it's not changing policy. It's coming through. So there's no. I just wondered if there was anything unforeseen that I hadn't thought of, certainly as a kind of layman when it comes to this.
Alan, are you able to add to that?
I think as we stand at the moment, we're fairly proactive in terms of repairs and maintenance where we have contact with tenants who make allegations that landlords haven't complied. I think we'll probably see that from some of the reports that have already been presented through the licensing panel and the issues that arise. I think this gives us another tool in the armoury, if you like, or a tool in the toolbox to deal with landlords and to give the opportunity through a properly established legal process. Previously, we were only able to really look at the fit and proper status. So if a landlord didn't comply, we had to make an assessment on information available, whether that was significant enough to consider the fit and proper status and the implications of potentially revoking a registration. What we have here is an opportunity to further encourage a landlord to comply, to prevent empty homes, to prevent enforcement action, and hopefully to, as the government strategy indicates, to have a private rented sector that provides good quality homes and high management standards.
Come back in.
Thanks. No, so I'm taking from that there's no any really unforeseen undue pressure, you could say, on the council, either financial or resource-wise, but it's another tool to the council's arm when it comes to actually putting properties back in a proper way to live.
Okay, thank you. Finlay?
I suppose just to reinforce that what could potentially be the cost implications to the council, but I think you've answered it by saying that actually all we're doing here is putting in place a legal process and a path through to a conclusion rather than actually adding any extra bureaucracy or complication.
And just before I bring Alan in, and because this is a pilot scheme as well, that we've been asked to take part in, we'll be able to monitor that as well moving forward. But Alan?
Yeah, I mean, I think that certainly is my position, that we already have the position where we would visit and inspect a property where a tenant made a complaint. We'd bring that to the attention of the landlord and would expect some form of action to rectify. We have got some that have gone through licensing panel where there are action plans sitting at the moment, and again, that as a way of encouraging a landlord to comply with the legal requirements placed upon them. I don't see any significant or any cost implications. As I say, it's just a change in process and a legislative process that would allow a local authority to make application to the PRHP. I think that maybe improves the situation overall, because we then get a determination from a tribunal about a failure to comply with or confirmation that the repairs and maintenance issues have been addressed.
Jim?
Thanks, Chair. It's on page 23.4, where it talks about changes have been made and new requirements will come into place over the coming months and year. And then it goes on to talk about the introduction of mandatory inspection and certification of electrical installations and portable electrical appliances. I don't know how a private landlord will be able to manage that, given that people buy appliances throughout the course of the whole year. And I don't know whether it'll apply to existing or simply new, or it'll be part of a process when a complaint has been lodged.
Alan?
Yeah, this is a different process altogether. It's part of the repairing standard, which is why I'd mentioned it, but with effect from the 1st of December this year, there will be a legal obligation on landlords to obtain an electrical installation condition report, which verifies the electrical installation in the property is safe, and where portable electrical appliances have been provided as part of the terms of the tenancy, then they would require to be inspected as well. In terms of new goods, I think there's an exemption for the first 12 months, but if in complying with these requirements, the qualified electrician or person who's doing the part testing goes in, they will have to make an assessment of that and test the appliances that are there. So it's not something that... There's always been a requirement for a landlord to ensure that electrical installation is safe. This just adds to that and now specifies that it must be certified and it must be completed at least every 5 years to meet the requirements of the repairing standard and these new regulations. It adds to, or added to that, is the installation of carbon monoxide detection as well for any carbon fuel appliances that are used in the property.
Come back in, Jim.
Just briefly, and I appreciate that, and that's absolutely fine, but how do we deal with, if it's just on every 5-year cycle, people that buy their own portable electrical goods and take them into their home? Because clearly I accept that a landlord should be responsible for the installation and anything that's provided under the rental contract or agreement, but it's how you then deal with the responsibility of stuff that really can be a purchase at random over a period of time and are owned by the tenant.
Alan?
Yeah, tenant's property is exempt from the requirement. So if you rent a house which is unfurnished and no portable electrical appliances, then there's no part testing required. There'll be a requirement for the electrical installation, but any goods provided by the tenant themselves remain their responsibility, not the responsibility of the landlord.
Okay, Colin?
Thanks.
Oh.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, it'll be interesting to see just how many applications we actually make. I can understand circumstances where a tenant might be unwilling. It might be helpful to know what circumstances they'll be unable to actually make an application themselves. But given the fact that the vast majority of cases that we take up effectively are as a direct result of tenants making complaints, is there any circumstances you see where we would make an application without actually the tenant knowing? Do we actually inform the tenant? Would there be circumstances whereby we've identified something that hasn't necessarily come from a tenant complaint and we've made a direct application?
Yeah, it's a similar sort of point I was going to raise as to whether we have to take this forward direct from a tenant or whether a third party brings this into play. But yeah.
One of the parts of the application process to the PRHP is that we must ascertain whether the tenant wishes to be party to the ongoing proceedings. I would find it difficult to envisage any circumstances where a tenant wasn't aware of the fact that there were an issue or was an issue with the property, because the first part of any process is to establish the extent or that there is a problem. Therefore, to gain access to the property, you're going to have the consent or certainly the cooperation of a tenant. So I can't see any circumstances where we would raise an issue without the knowledge of the tenant. And I think we have to take into account, on some occasions, certainly the views of the tenant. I think to answer the second part, there are occasions when tenants have differing reasons for not making application. What we've looked at and what we aim to do here within the private rented sector is to ensure that properties are maintained to the appropriate standard. The alternative route that some use, and I think I can say that with a degree of confidence, is that there's no incentive to have the property maintained to the standard that's required. It's an opportunity to gain access to properties elsewhere that a tenant may seek to achieve, rather than to repair and bring a private rented property up to standard.
Okay, Ian again.
I suppose 2 points is how will we actually monitor this? And that's the question that's only come to mind since we've. I thought it would be through as they apply for a licence. There'll be another box has to be ticked. The fact that this has been done, but the strategic plan with the Health and Social Care Integration Joint Board, I should agree, the strategic plan, and there's an emphasis in that in regards to keeping people at home, community based, and that includes people with dementia. So I think that might in time come the point where actually there is people living at home who maybe wouldn't pick up on certain things. So I think it was a relevant question, maybe not right at this moment in time, but it will be over the next 3 to 5 years certainly become relevant, where you will have people, maybe tenanted properties, they'll have a carer, fair enough, unpaid or not. They may well pick up if it will become the case in the future.
Okay, thank you. No further members. Return to the recommendations. Members are asked to note the introduction of new regulations under the Housing Scotland Act 2014 and that Dumfries and Galloway Council be one of the pilot authorities when the regulations take effect on 1st of December 2015. Noted. Thank you, members. Moving on to item 6, any other business deemed urgent. I'd just like to take a quick item in this area, and that is to ask John if he can give members a verbal update on the Common Housing Register and where we are with that.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. As members will recall, there's been an ongoing review of the the Common Housing Register, and the commitment that we would consult with area committees. There's been some delays in terms of completing that review, I think it's fair to say. We still are awaiting the draft report, which we anticipate we'll get over the next 2 or 3 weeks. There's then going to be a meeting of all the key partners to agree the consultation and sign off for that process. And we anticipate that the consultation with the area committees will then happen early in the new year, subject to that process following. So apologies, it's taken longer than we thought, but it's been quite a complex and detailed piece of work. And once we've got the draft report to hand, we'll then start the consultation as agreed by members. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, members happy with that? Okay, thank you. Item 7, Local Government Scotland Act. Consider adoption of resolution to exclude the public from the meeting in terms of section 50A and paragraph 3 the Local Government Scotland Act. Members agree? Thank you.